there.
Hi, so good to see you, Jan.
Thank you. So good to see you.
So, this is everybody's favorite topic, I think, anti-aging today. So, I thought we would share our expertise in this, and I would like to start with you. And what would you say is the current position on how to reduce or slow down the aging process, both internally and externally?
Well, today this is going to be really interesting and a lot of fun because we're not just talking about externally, but we're going to be talking about internally. And I know this is going to sound like science fiction, but the prevailing premise, and this is becoming much, much more mainstream, is we don't have to age. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to die. It doesn't mean we're going to live forever, not at this point. But aging is considered to be a disease. We don't typically think of it as a disease because everyone ages. So we just almost think of it as this normal progression. But we really don't have to age. And I want to emphasize, I'm not an expert. You know, there are a lot of experts out there, quote experts, but I don't know if there's any one expert in this field on everything because it is evolving and it's so complex and it's very exciting, but there's just so many different moving parts.
I agree. I was mentioning before you joined that I had participated in the Cleveland Clinic's conference in December on aging. And that's pretty much what the conclusion was, that people can live much longer and be healthier, well above 100 years old. And so we should be thinking about people working into their 70s, 80s, 90s, and maybe beyond. If people are living to 120, 130, it's going to completely change the whole economics and social structure that we have here.
You are so right.
So there are ways to keep yourself healthy, and some of them are not really very difficult to do, and they're not that controversial really, but it'll take a long time before people are living that sort of lifestyle. And so they gave us a lot of data, and certainly there were some disagreements, and there's some controversy about some of the studies that have been done as to whether there certain things really are useful or not. But the other thing I found very interesting is some of the studies that have been done in the past are very short-term studies. So they'll say, supplements or vitamins make no difference whatsoever in terms of your health and your longevity. But some of these things take decades to show an improvement. And if you're only following it for a year or two, you're going to see no difference at all.
And the thing about nutrition, unfortunately, this is the challenge. So when we develop a drug or a substance that could be beneficial, it's usually done by a pharmaceutical firm because there's a payoff. They're able to patent it, and they're able to have like a 20-year window where they can make ostensibly billions of dollars. With nutritional substances, they're already prior art. They're already out there. So no pharmaceutical firm is going to spend $50 or $100 million in really doing an in-depth study. So unfortunately, the studies that we have are somewhat minimal, but we are seeing more and more in this area coming out of universities like Harvard, out of Yale, out of major universities, because it's not necessarily patenting a particular substance. It's about the data that will support some of the inventions and the exciting new things that are going to be moving forward.
Exactly. And I really felt fortunate to be able to hear firsthand from some of the researchers, some of the work that they've been doing. Some of the things that didn't actually involve using any sort of internally ingested product or externally applied product. Some of them were hyperbaric oxygen, certain amounts of exercise and which types of exercise, infrared saunas, and intermittent fasting. And so these things
we're going to be talking about intermittent fasting.
What's your take on these?
Well, first thing is, I think that, you know, to go back to what you said and sort of unpack this a little bit. Aging really is within our personal control to a great extent. Yes, there is an anti-aging drug out there that you can actually get your hands on now, and I think there's going to be a lot of things in the future. And to completely reverse aging, we're a ways off from that. But there are all these new developments that are going to be able to target and treat and even reverse certain aspects of aging. And there are certain things that we can do as individuals that are within our control. Now, when it comes to aging, it's oftentimes being referred to as health span, not lifespan. Health span. For example, it's estimated that genetics only account for roughly 20% when it comes to our health span. 20%. That's 80% that is within our control. And it's also estimated that individuals, let's say you're going to live to be 90 or 95, that there could be as many as 8 or 10 years where you do not have a good health span. You could be bedridden, you could have some type of an ailment. So it's also about whether you live to be 80, 90, 100, you know, hopefully I'd like to live to be 150 or more. But it's being able to prevent being incapacitated. And this is an enormous subject. We're not even going to scratch the surface today. So again, it's not about medical advice. You can give medical advice. I'm not giving medical advice, but we can talk about the overall direction and some of these extraordinary advances. And frankly, when we look at the aging process overall, and there's always the question, well, how do we age? So I'm going to break it into 3 categories. And the first one is inflammation. So aging is considered to be an inflammatory disease. And whether you're talking about it internally or externally, because I've always said aging in terms of the skin is also an inflammatory disease. And I always like to say, in a sense, we're rusting to death. So inflammation contributes to heart disease, arthritis. It's a major causative factor in diabetes. And it also causes tissue degeneration. Inflammation damages your immune system and your ability to repair. It negatively impacts tissue repair. With inflammation, cancer rates rise. And again, aging skin, because when you're exposed to UV light, that's immediate inflammation. And think about this. Acne is an inflammatory disorder. Rosacea is an inflammatory disorder. Discoloration is triggered or exacerbated by inflammation from UV light. Now, the second part is compromised instructions coming from our DNA. So that's number 2. I've talked about this as it relates, again, externally, but this is internally as well. So your genes are made up of DNA. Some of your genes are expressive genes. They express instructions. It's the only instructions the body listens to. So it doesn't matter whether you have a broken bone, doesn't matter whether it's a sunburn, a cold, a hangnail. You're going to be living with that forever unless your body has some type of a blueprint or a way of knowing how to repair that. And when you're born, literally, your epigenome is like a perfectly pristine CD. There's not a scratch on it. It's great clarity. Everything is being repaired beautifully. And it's, a newborn is doing nothing but constantly growing and developing. And even though maybe you start to see little compromises or scratches on that CD, until you get to reach the age about 20, when you reach a catabolic state. So you're in an anabolic state. When you reach that catabolic state, you're starting to slowly decline. You don't necessarily notice it right away, but you're not getting taller. You're not really continuing to develop. At that point, you have so many little scratches. That CD is compromised. You're not repairing the same way. And we see this as the aging process, even though it may be relatively slow. But you see it internally. You see it in terms of, how you respond to disease, or how your energy levels. You see it in terms of externally. And then finally, this is number 3, the gradual shutdown of anti-aging genes, and these are called sirtuins. There's about 24 sirtuins, these 24 of these genes. So why do we remain in an anabolic state till we're 20 or 25 years old, and we rebuild and we grow and we develop muscle mass and we're energetic and healthy? And then we begin to slip into this catabolic state and we start to decline. Well, sirtuins play a major role in enabling our body to repair and rebuild and remain healthy and vibrant and energetic. So that's a really important piece of the puzzle. Now, they're made up of proteins. And I'm terrible at pronouncing this, but these proteins are nicotinamide, adenine, dinucleotide. I think I got that. Now, this is critical for these sirtuins to function. They have to have enough of this.
So Sirtuins? I haven't heard that word.
Sirtuins. It's spelled Sirtuens. So that's critical for them to function. They have to have these proteins. And they control your DNA repair. So, I'm talking about how you repair. They control inflammation. They have a major influence on that. Health, fitness, survival, your memory. They help to prevent senescent cells from accumulating, because those are like zombie cells. They don't divide, but they don't die. So they take up the place for other cells, new cells to be made, new tissue. And again, they oftentimes refer to them as zombie cells, but you want to eliminate them. You don't want those around there, because eliminating them, then you can stimulate new tissue production. So maintaining and turning on sirtuins can increase health span and longevity. Now, so this is a really, really critical area. And here's kind of how I want people to picture this. Think of your sirtuins like you've got this car sitting in your driveway. It's in perfect condition. And it's not dented. There's nothing wrong with the engine. But for whatever reason, it just sits there, because either it doesn't have enough gasoline, or it doesn't have the other factors that are needed to power it. So when we talk about these proteins that are needed to power it, there's something else that we're getting into called resveratrol. If that's not getting to these sirtuins, then you've got the ability to make new tissue. You've got the ability to have a much healthier lifespan, but we're just not getting that car the fuel or what it needs.
And the fuel is?
Well, so how do you address those issues? And this is where it starts to get really exciting. And I can break it down into essentially 4 areas. So one is diet, one is intermittent fasting, one is supplementation, and the other one has to do with anti-aging, or an anti-aging drug, or anti-aging drugs. Those 4 areas.
Well, as you said, all these things are under a person's control.
That's right.
I think that it's never too late to even start doing these things. You don't have to start before you're 20 years old to see some differences.
And everything that we're talking about today, really, there's nothing really difficult about it.
Right.
But if it were really that easy, there's a lot that we know right now. We know how to, for the most part, prevent diabetes. Mm-hmm. But diabetes is an epidemic. We know how to prevent obesity, but obesity is an epidemic. So there's a lot of answers out there. And what we're talking about today goes even further than that. And probably the first area would be diet. Now, again, this is kind of an oversimplification, but in general, number one, sugar is an inflammatory. Now, sugar, for example, what has to do with our skin, it attaches to our collagen. So this glucose, these glucose molecules, that once it gets broken down, it gets into your bloodstream, and it goes to every cell in your body, but it attaches to the collagen, our dermis, and it causes the collagen to stiffen and deteriorate and decrease. Now, one study showed that if you were to greatly eliminate sugar, keep it at this really low level, that in 2 weeks you could have a 25% improvement in your bad collagen in just 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
How soon
And
would
sugar,
you see the effects on your skin?
that's right. And here's the thing. I think it's equally as important to have the effects internally. But the fact is that seeing it externally is a reward. And so when you see that, it oftentimes motivates individuals to really, want to continue. Because a lot of the times, we may not necessarily immediately notice an effect physically. We'd like to say, oh yeah, gee, in 2 weeks, my energy was so much better. But it takes a while for these things to show up. And sugar is also a causative factor in many conditions related to all of these various things we've been talking about, having to do with inflammation, whether it is, a cognitive decline, whether it is arthritis, whether it's heart disease, all of these things. Second thing, low carb diet. And I'm telling you, I'm sure that your Cleveland Clinic talked about this, because Harvard, everyone is talking about this. This used to be, remember back in the Atkins days, it was like considered to be a fad. And Dr. Atkins was, nothing short of maybe a bit of a crackpot. But this is so critical. And it's not just glycemic index, it's the glycemic load. Mm-hmm. So it has to do with how your body processes the sugar or the carbs. So my go-to example is you could have a quarter cup of sugar, or you could have the best piece of whole wheat bread, and that bread will turn into more sugar than the sugar. And again, what happens is how your liver processes it. It goes into every cell in your body, and then it turns into sugar. And what that does is, again, that contributes to all this inflammation, but it also shows up out here. And finally, the other thing to keep in mind besides carbs is that, and it kind of back to skin again, and we're going to get more into skin in the end, but milk causes acne, dairy, not because we give hormones to cattle, but because we milk cattle when they're pregnant. So I don't care if you buy your milk at organic milk at Whole Foods or where you buy it, but you're getting steroidal hormones because cows do not nurse their young when they become pregnant. They push them away. So we continue to milk cows to keep the herds up and keep the production up, and it causes acne because of these steroidal hormones. And that's yogurt, and that's milk, and that's ice cream, and that's dairy. And the fact is, the U.S. is a lot different than a lot of countries where milk is not a primary part of their diet. Ideally, we were meant to nurse children until maybe as old as 3 or 4 years old, and then they didn't get milk again. So that's another issue in terms of diet, just kind of an aside.
One way that I've been talking to my patients about this whole sugar situation is I have a lot of people coming to me that are overweight. They want me to do liposuction or come up with some sort of body sculpting treatment for them. And some of them are too heavy really for that treatment, and I'd like to get them into more of a healthy lifestyle. And then we can take fat from certain areas that are troublesome. Obviously, some people get fat areas that they just, no matter how much they diet and exercise, it's still there. But when you think about the sugar load and the glycemic load that certain food products have, you think about the fact that insulin is released when you ingest this sugar or
That's right.
carbohydrate. And the more insulin you produce, the more fat your body makes, because that's what insulin's job is to take that sugar and turn it into potential energy, which we store as fat. So the more you have elevated insulin levels, the more fat you're going to pack on. Growth hormone is just the opposite. So when you have a high level of growth hormone, you're actually metabolizing that fat, and you can be building muscle. So exercise increases growth hormone levels.
It does.
Sleep increases growth hormone levels, and fasting increases growth hormone levels.
And the other thing to keep in mind, guys, is that when your insulin levels go up, even if you're not insulin resistant, let's just say that you are a normal weight, but there are times where you may have a very high carb meal, or ingest a lot of sugar. What happens is when your insulin levels kind of spike up really high, one of the ways that your body brings it down is to produce more testosterone. Guess what? Acne. Guess where that is? In adult females. It's hairy oil in the jawline. So this happens we see this on a consistent basis when people have polycystic ovary, but it is also something that is a contributing factor in just this adult epidemic of acne that we see in women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond. Now, you mentioned intermittent fasting. And this is something, again, that is just really interesting. So when we talk about increasing lifespan, the only study that we have that's considered to be, I guess really you could say maybe a legitimate study, in animal models where they have been able to increase lifespan has to do with calorie deprivation or restriction. So you take animals and you deprive them not of nutrition, so they're getting good nutrition, but you really limit the calorie intake. And what they've been able to demonstrate is these animals extend their lifespans to the equivalent of about 150 human years. Now, there are about 10,000 people or so in the US that actually practice that. And you can imagine how long it would take to really do a human study, because you'd be doing it for generations. And not only that, I often wonder if these people who limit themselves to like 500 calories a day or less, and they juice everything up, if they're really living longer, or if they just think they're living longer because they're miserable. Well, there's an answer to that. So it's intermittent fasting. Now, intermittent fasting is believed to be able to mimic calorie restriction. And here are the basics. It's so easy. And I have to tell you, I did this for years and didn't even know it, because I don't like to eat breakfast. And even when I was growing up, parents always told their kids the most important meal of the day is breakfast. You can't go to school. You can't leave here unless you eat your breakfast. I hated breakfast. I'm just not hungry. So here's the basics. You limit your eating to a certain time frame. For example, let's say you have your evening meal at 6:30. You would wait to eat again for roughly 16 to 18 hours. So that might be 12:30, 1:30 in the afternoon. Or if you eat at 5, then it might be 11 a.m. And again, that's natural for me. That's what I prefer. And so then between the hours of 12:30 and 6:30, then you pretty much eat whatever you want, hopefully making certain that that is a low carb way of eating. Okay, so I'm a big eater, and people are always surprised at how much food I eat, but I typically eat very low carb. So the reason that this is believed to work, it's believed that intermittent fasting turns on certain sirtuins. And I take a publication called Cell Aging, which gets in, it's all about aging, but it is so technical, and it's I mean, I probably don't understand nearly what I would like to understand, but it gets into this in great detail. So this is something that we really do believe that it helps to turn on sirtuins. Now, how does it do that? Well, by causing mild stress. Now, we think of stress as being really bad. And yeah, it would be really bad because let's say you step on a snail. That's a lot of stress. That snail is not going to survive. But very mild stressors actually can turn on certain functions that may help improve our lifespan or actually sort of being anti-aging.
I have been doing the intermittent fasting. I'm kind of like you. I've never liked breakfast, and all breakfast foods kind of seem disgusting to me. So I usually would skip those if I had a choice. But I started, trying to eat healthy, and I'd make some oatmeal in the morning with blueberries and things like that. And you sort of get in the habit of expecting that when you do it regularly. And then when I heard about intermittent fasting, I thought, well, I never really thought about that. It was all sort of new to me. So I started doing it. Been doing it for about 2 months now. And I would say within, I'm not overweight, but I would say within about 3 weeks, I'd lost all the fat on my body. And I hadn't really tried to do anything. I ate what I wanted still. I just restricted it between like noon and 8 p.m. And don't eat anything, late at night or drink anything with any calories, And in the morning, if I wanted something to drink besides water, I'd have some green tea, that was unsweetened, and do my exercise. The other thing I found was if you eat right after you exercise, you've pretty much negated your effects of the exercise. So you do have to kind of exercise when you're in the fasting state, at least to get the most benefit from it. And I feel like I've got more energy doing this. And, it's just such a minor thing, just skipping breakfast, basically. And even on days where I thought, well, maybe I'll just do it 5 days a week, I don't even feel like eating anymore on those mornings, that I thought I would have something. So that's been a very simple thing to do. I've started also taking certain supplements that were recommended to help. But one thing I think is very telling is that more people are concerned about dementia than dying. They don't want to live being impaired, have cognitive impairment. That people dread more than dying. So if you want to live long, you also want to have your wits about you. And so much of what we're doing is also helping with cognitive function. And like hyperbaric oxygen in people who are cognitively impaired has been shown to make a huge difference in, I think it does increase blood vessel growth within the brain and helps with neural connections.
Well, to keep in mind also, and boy, we could spend hours on this, but you can get into, there's also some studies on gluten, but when we get into sugar, part of Alzheimer's, besides beta amyloid protein and the neurotransmitter acetylcholine and all of that, is the brain forms. So these plaques are like blanks. So if you look at a crossword puzzle and it has those little black squares, they take up space, but they don't do anything. Well, that's what blanks do. So it takes up space, but what it's doing is taking up the space of important cognitive function. And there are studies now that really are getting into that the way that we eat can contribute to those blanks. Now, the paradoxical thing about blanks and beta amyloid protein is that one of the largest studies ever done on aging was done with a development that started, I think, in the 50s or 60s called Sun City. And they followed and did brain imaging of these individuals who now, some of them are over 100 years old. Some of them have huge numbers, amounts of plaque on their brain, and their cognitive functions are fine. And others have much lesser plaque or blanks, and they have significant cognitive decline. But the thing is, the key between those two may be inflammation. So it's really important. And when you mentioned about supplementation and how you've heard a lot of physicians say for years, well, we don't really have any data on supplementation. If you eat a good diet, you don't need to do all of that. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of things that are really, really important, because I'll tell you, supplementation is a slippery slope. And if you take one of the companies, which is, I'm trying to think of the name of it's the longevity, Life Extension. Life Extension is a company that has really fought for years and years and done studies and followed studies having to do with nutrition. And they also are a company that sells nutrition. And it started with Dirk and Sandy Pearson, who were kind of the whole leaders in this whole area. And I think they do a lot of good things in the area of nutrition. But if you read their magazine, I mean, you could, every single month there's something that you just can't live without. So I'm gonna kind of unpack this and make it a lot more simple. There are two things that make an enormous difference. And there's a book out there that is called Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to, by Dr. Sinclair. I'm trying to remember what his first name is. I have it written down here somewhere because I can never remember that. David Sinclair. And this is a book that is just, I think, tremendous in this area, one of the best books that's out there. And he only takes two or three different things. But one of the things is, first of all, NAD. Now, NAD stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. Remember I mentioned that? That's what you need for those Sirtuins to function. So you have to think of it like gasoline for your car. That car will sit there, it can be in perfect condition, but it can't run without gasoline. So this is gasoline for your car. Now, for a number of reasons right now, the actual NAD that whole long word that I said, is not available. But the closest thing to it, which actually turns into it, it's a precursor, it's the closest precursor, that has been shown to significantly raise NAD level. And it does it better than anything that we've seen so far. And that's called nicotinamide riboside. And it's sold as NAD plus, with a plus sign, NAD. Okay? So what it is the precursor to that nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And companies there's a lot of companies that sell this because it's patented, so they're all getting it from the same source. So whether you get it from Life Extension or whether you get it from Truogen, or there's a number of companies out there. Now, talk to your physician, but in general, what's recommended out there is you start off with about 300 milligrams and work up to about 1,000 milligrams a day. My own physician takes 1,000. Okay, so that's one thing. So the second thing, so we put gasoline in the gas tank for those Sirtuins. Second thing is that you need to then have something that puts the pedal to the metal, so to speak. And that's resveratrol. Now, David Sinclair was the person who invented resveratrol. And he actually still has his original invention. I think he has tons of it, probably enough to last him the rest of his life, down in his basement. But he sold it to a pharmaceutical firm for something like just under $1 billion. And because there's such huge evidence of the actual chemical, this is something that you find in grapes, but you can't drink 1,000 glasses of wine a day, which has to be made the old-fashioned way, by the way. So it's a chemical that's in it. And the chemical that he invented that is able to do this is not something, again, that's available to us. So this pharmaceutical firm was interested in its ability to, what it appeared to possibly even reverse or be able to prevent Alzheimer's, and just have this tremendous effect on aging. Where they're at with that, I don't know. But this probably would have ended up being some kind of a prescription solution. However, we do have resveratrol available. It's just not quite as bioavailable. And so there's some out there that are a lot better than others. And again, think of this as like being able to put the pedal on the gas. It has been shown to have anti-tumor activity. It's strongly anti-inflammatory. It's heart protective. It's brain protective. It helps prevent insulin resistance. And so again, this whole cognitive issue. It's believed to be able to activate the Sirtuin-1 gene. So the one that I recommend, and I should be getting a kickback, but I don't, believe me, I don't have any stock interest or anything in this company. But the one that I recommend is called Longevinex. Longinex. Okay. Now, there's also a drug. And this is something that's available today. And I don't know if they talked about this at Cleveland Clinic, but this is actually, as we speak, this is actually going through the FDA as an anti-aging drug. But it's available now by prescription. And it's been around for years, and it's probably one of the most prescribed drugs in the world. And this is Metformin. Now, Metformin was actually originally discovered in 1922. It comes from the lily plant. And then it went into prescription use for diabetes in 1972. And because diabetes is such an epidemic, I mean, this drug has one of the most widely used drugs in the entire world. Now, here's what's interesting about Metformin. There is a study done on about 14,000 people. And what they determined, essentially, I'm going to kind of paraphrase this, but let's just say you have diabetes, and let's say that you're a couch potato, and you don't have a very good diet, and you're overweight, and you don't exercise, but you take Metformin for your diabetes. That person, that older person, will probably live anywhere from 3 to 5 years longer than you or me. And we're doing everything we can because they're taking Metformin. Now, Metformin has been proven. These are studies that are actually good studies that have proven this. That is protective against Alzheimer's. It extends lifespan. It's protective against many diseases. We're talking about heart disease. I know individuals who have had cardiac episodes whose doctors have them on Metformin strictly for that. It significantly lessens inflammation. It's protective against cancer, Alzheimer's. It improves energy, it improves vibrance, it improves your skin. Now, I'm kind of going to oversimplify this a bit, but what happens is when we ingest glucose, our liver has certain enzymes that kind of help to prevent it from just being dumped. And even though, let's say you don't have diabetes, I guarantee you your blood sugar levels aren't going to be the same at 40 as they were at 20. And our blood sugar levels can go up as we get older, even though we may not have diabetes. And so what this does is Metformin strictly keeps your liver from just dumping the sugar willy-nilly, so to speak. If you take it, it does that. If you don't take it, it doesn't do that. It's not like there's some hangover and it has, takes forever to get out of your system, or there's some type of thing that happens because you stop taking it and now something else goes wrong. You take it or you don't take it. It helps with the sugar or it doesn't. And so what it's doing is you're not having all this glucose going into every cell in your body. You're not having it go into the collagen in your skin. And it also is believed to turn on Sirtuins. Now, what is the rationale behind that? Remember I said about stress? You know how we hear all the time, free radicals are so bad. And I always say, you can't just say everything is good or everything is bad. What Metformin appears to do in terms of Sirtuins is it appears to release tiny little amounts of free radicals into cells. Just enough as a stressor to turn on Sirtuins. Now, one thing I want to mention, this is not difficult to get. I'll tell you a quick story. Well over a year ago, and doing a lot of research and things, I called my doctor And I had my whole story planned out. I was going to say, doctor, you know, this is my rationale. And I was going to go into all this detail about my research and everything. And I started out talking about metformin, and she wouldn't even let me get 10 seconds into it. And she said, no problem. She'd been taking it herself. She doesn't have diabetes. Every researcher I know takes it and they don't have diabetes. Now, here's the thing to keep in mind. People who have diabetes sometimes do 2,000 or 2,500 milligrams a day. Studies so far have shown that doing more than 1,000 milligrams a day isn't going to be any better in terms of anti-aging. It's 1,000 milligrams. More is not better. Now, also, the other thing is, I personally do not do the time released. A while back, about a year ago, there was a recall on the time released because there wasn't anything wrong with metformin, but the time release mechanism apparently had some kind of a issue where they were worried that there's some toxicity. They probably have taken care of that. But nevertheless, I don't do the time release. But many physicians like to divide the doses, 500 in the morning and 500 at night. I personally do all mine at night because pretty much that's when I have my main meal.
Right. So you take 1,000 milligrams at night?
Yeah, I just take it, while I'm cooking dinner, take my 1,000 milligrams.
Yeah.
And so, but it's really, you can discuss that with your physician. And I have not had anyone who's had difficulty getting a prescription for metformin. There's really are no side effects per se in general. The worst side effect that happens with metformin, and it hasn't happened to anybody but me, and that is that in the beginning you can get bloating.
For some reason in my memory banks it seems like some people get diarrhea with it, but I'd have to...
I have an acquaintance also that claims that she can eat anything except when she eats too much sugar with metformin, she gets sick, which she actually kind of likes. But, that's kind of anecdotal. So again, what it does is it lessens the liver from dumping sugar. It's anti-inflammatory. And again, turns on sirtuins.
Well, for a long time, it's been prescribed for people who to combat weight gain, especially as a side effect to certain medications, like certain psychiatric medications make people put on weight. So a lot of times the psychiatrist would prescribe metformin to help curb that weight gain. Yeah.
And certain, common antidepressants, even the ones that are serotonin uptake sometimes can have effects. Now, anecdotally, one of my acquaintances who's pretty small to begin with, she's really slender, but she just didn't change the way that she ate, but she lost about 3 pounds. So it's not like this massive weight loss, but she wasn't overweight to begin with. But this is something that is really exciting. And this is really, we're on the cusp. There's going to be so many things like this up in the horizon, but this is something you can do right now. Now, how does this kind of relate into, the whole skin thing? And I'm going to mention just one thing, because anybody who's listened to you at IG Live, you know that I talk a lot about the skincare management system, and everything starts with the skincare management system. But I'm going to take it a step further today. When we look at the aging process, there's 3 segments. One is heredity. And heredity is bone structure. If you want to know how you're going to age, look at mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, and I can't do anything about your bone structure. Second one is intrinsic aging. And intrinsic aging is really called true aging. So it's things like, this is a little depressing, but it's things like, by the age of 60, 80% of females will lose the show of upper teeth. Your upper lip actually elongates. It starts to turn under. The vermilion border flattens. The platysma takes the corners of the mouth down. It pulls it down this way. Cheek pads start to move down. You get a nasolabial fold. this part of your face ends up being wider than this part of your face. Your nose can actually droop. The broadens through the base. Earlobes elongate 1/3 of a centimeter in men, a little bit less in women. Need I say more?
It's
That's
already depressing.
aging. Now, here's the good news. And by the way, we can fix all that, right? You know, if you choose to have cosmetic issues, you can fix all that. But that is 3 to 4% of the aging process. 90 to 95% of what we perceive as inevitable aging is extrinsic. That's sun damage. And so it translates into stratum corneum. This dead layer out here gets thicker and it gets coarser, and our dermis gets thinner, and we don't have the same barrier function, and it's kind of like somebody let the air out of our face. It's like letting the air out of a balloon. And so also, but what that also translates into, bottom line, is it's those compromised instructions coming from your DNA. Okay? So those instructions, if we're able to sort of correct them, it's like turning the skin's aging clock back. Now, we can do that with retinoids, but one of the things that I don't have an opportunity to talk about that often is age intervention regeneration booster. We'll just call it booster. Now, booster is used along with the system, but this has got a really great story, and it goes back quite a few years. Now, this has to do with telomeres and telomerase enzymes. So this is another piece of the aging puzzle. Telomeres come off the end cap of your DNA. They look like shoelaces. And the end of the telomere looks like the end of a shoelace, like that hard plastic thing. And your telomeres are kind of like the granddaddy control panel, because as you age, they slowly shorten. If they get really short, you lose the ability to repair, your immune function goes, and you pass on. Now, one of the reasons we know this is because children who have progeria, which is that aging disease where they turn into little old people, they are actually born with little tiny short telomeres. They're born old. Now, the Nobel Scientific Prize a number of years ago was awarded to 3 physicians for their work on aging and longevity as they relate to telomeres and telomerase enzyme. My research started well before that. So the telomerase enzyme, the end of the telomere, is made up of genetic material. It's chromosomes, and it's different genetic material that protects the telomere, and it also helps to prevent premature shortening, and it kind of helps to stabilize it. And telomeres are fluid. So if you are going through a lot of stress or you have an illness, they can actually shorten prematurely. But on the other hand, if you change your lifestyle and if you improve diet and things like that, they can actually lengthen a bit. So one of the things that helps to protect it and helps to determine that is this telomerase enzyme. Well, this is my medical library behind me, and I have this little library about telomeres and telomerase, and I'm reading in there, and there's an obscure study, and they soaked skin cells in telomerase enzyme, and they never aged.
Wow.
And now, we're not at that point, but what I can tell you is that Booster has something that's patented called cycloestrogenol, which comes from the astragalus plant, and it appears to affect, I think it's CD3 and CD4 cells. And what it does is it's believed to be able to help to stabilize and maybe even just give a little bit of length to the telomere. And like I said, it's kind of like you turn back the skin's aging clock. Now, the study on Booster was actually published in the Journal of Drugs and Dermatology. And in that study, virtually every patient had a 100% response, whether it was collagen, elastin, appearance of discoloration, just overall appearance of fine lines and wrinkles, texture, all of those things, all those parameters. And it's used with the system, and it's just kind of in keeping with everything we've been talking about today. And I like to say that along with these advances internally, I'm constantly trying to come up with these advances externally, or that can actually translate that into how we look on the outside.
That's really wonderful. How do you fit that in with the use of the system? Where do you put that?
Well, it's the only accelerator, we call these things accelerate the system, that you use first, right after you clean, before anything else. All the other accelerators go on after BioClear.
Right.
That goes first.
I know we have some here, so I'm going to go get myself some. I wasn't exactly sure how it was used and what it was for, so I'm really glad to know that I definitely want to look as young as possible, and so do all of my patients. I think that
I'm right there with you. I just
there's
turned
no
7.
reason not to feel like you want to look young. It's just for yourself too. I mean, so many people try and do things to please other people, but I think you need to do something to please yourself. And when you like what you see when you get up in the morning and look in the mirror, then I think it boosts your day. It makes you feel good. And if you feel young, you might as well look young.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I turned 70 in December, and I'd like to be healthy and vibrant, and
well, you're one of these people that they hold up as see what you can do. She's still working, and she's 120 years old.
But
want to be that.
Boosters. Well, first of all, everybody starts with the system, and this is no different for me. But Boosters, one of my favorite products, and besides having that cycloestradiol, and it also has keratinocyte growth factor, which helps with volume. It has epidermal growth factor. It has TGF beta 1. It has lots of peptides and anti-inflammatories. So it's just, of the things that we can do to influence the skin topically. And keep in mind, skin's your largest organ. Mm-hmm. And if skin weren't a barrier, then we drowned in the bathtub. So keep in mind, this is a barrier. Getting things to affect the skin is challenging. Now, you don't really have to have a lot of penetration, because we can affect receptor sites, and every cell has receptor sites. And so, it's very complex. But nevertheless, we're finding more and more ways topically to be able to work with the appearance of these various kinds of skin concerns, and acne and rosacea and discoloration and, fine lines and wrinkles and all of that. And so I think, though, we're going to see a lot of advances in that area as well.
This has really been fascinating. I love hearing all your ideas, and you do so much research that it just sort of helps put everything together for everybody to have something practical to look at and to work on. And I just think it's been really interesting. We could probably do a whole other session on this. There's so much.
I know. But, well, I'm sure people have a lot of questions too, and maybe we can answer some questions at some point in one of our sessions. But yeah, it is really fun, and it's fascinating, and it's just so much that we don't hear about that's going on in being able to not only the preventative aspect of it, but being able to reverse blindness, or being able to find ways that, they're still focusing on growing organs and different things like that just can help to have so much of an impact in being able to extend life. But this whole nutritional side is definitely legitimate. And I'm so happy to know that it's getting a lot more legitimacy, as opposed to sort of being this fringe medicine. And the fact that you were focusing on that at the Cleveland Clinic is just amazing.
Yeah, they do it every year, so I always learn something from them. We focused one meeting on plant-based nutrition, and so that was very informative. I'm not ready to turn into a vegan, but a lot of people really believe in.
Sure.
I try and be healthy, and a lot of what is vegan cooking and diet is very healthy for you. I actually belong to a bean club, So I do my beans regularly, and it's people kind of make fun of me a little bit about it, but I feel like I'm doing something good for my body. It's healthy, and I've really gotten into kind of going to the source, getting heirloom type of quality meats and vegetables and that sort of thing. And the taste is so much better, the nutrition is better, and
is so that whole thing too is so complex. As we're simplifying things today, but another really fascinating book out there, which has been around for a long time, is Eat Right for Your Blood Type by Peter Adamo. His father was apparently a renowned cardiologist, and I spoke at the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine at one point, and stood around in a group with a number of very renowned physicians who all felt that there was a lot of validity to this book, and some of them had even looked at his father's records. And what it's based on, it has to do with your ancestry and anthropological nutrition. So type O, the original blood type, those individuals were meat eaters. And they didn't have access to vegetables. They didn't have access to fruits, maybe just for very tiny times during the year. And so what he did is he studied individuals with blood types and the types of diseases that they were prone to and how they responded if they ate in the way that their blood type originally intended them to eat. Okay. So a person with B or A or AB or whatever could be very different than a person who is type O. I'm an O. I'm the original meat eater. And I have to tell you, I do love meat and salmon and anything and I literally could live on it with nothing else. But it's interesting how that also can affect you and your overall health and your vibrancy and your well-being. So I do think that there's something to that, but it's still so complex. And why is it that some people have certain genes that broccoli can help to prevent breast cancer and other people don't have that particular gene? And so again, I think that one of the last great frontiers has to do with nutrition and has to do with diet and how we eat. But this, again, a fascinating subject, and we could just keep going on and on about this.
I know. I think we're about out of time, but I really have enjoyed this, and I hope everybody who's joined with us has gotten something to think about, and maybe we'll be able to address some other issues like this in the future. But thank you so much, Jan.
Thank you. So much fun. Thank you so much.
And bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, guys. I wouldn't be here without you. Bye.